Okay, I think that I can start. When introducing a new piece of software, like a new tool, a new framework, it's typical to start with a deck of slides and then close with a nice looking demonstration. However, I think that for the sake of this presentation, it makes sense to spend a couple of minutes in order to cut to the chase and give you an idea of what Backstage is before I move to the slide and close with the demo. So, what is Backstage? Backstage is an open source platform for creating developer portals. It is something that you can clone a project, that you can clone, you can heavily modify either by adding, removing plugins, or even writing code of your own in order to create your own developer portal that suits the needs of your organization. In the right side of my screen, you can see a personalized dev portal that I created for my needs in order to track the software components that I'm currently involved, either personal or related to my work. And I also modified this portal so that it even includes things like slides. So in the left side of my screen, I've added a section for including slides, not just software components. And in those slides, I have, for example, the introduction to Backstage, which is exactly the presentation that I'm going to give today. And it's even possible to do the whole presentation directly from the Backstage installation. So welcome everyone to Introduction to Backstage. I'm Ioannis Canellos, and I'm a software engineer for like 2 decades now, almost 20 years. Where I mostly write software using Java and focusing on open source projects. I'm also a member at the Apache Software Foundation, where over the years, I had the privilege to be involved in a lot of cool and interesting projects, including Apache Camel, Apache Carafe, Service Mix, and more. Since 2012, 12 years now, I'm part of Red Hat, where I spend most of my time in the intersection between the Java world and Kubernetes. The result of this work are some projects I have created, including the Fabricate Kubernetes client, Spring Cloud Kubernetes, which is quite popular, Decorate, and more. The last couple of years, I spent most of my time working on a very new and cool framework for Java called Quarkus, which is a modern framework that promises to make Java apps fast, lean, and very fun to develop. Part of my involvement in Quarkus is also the integration with Backstage, which is going to be the topic of this presentation. So what is Backstage? Backstage is an open source platform for building developer portals. It was created by Spotify for streamlining software development and maintenance. But let's put a pin on that because I would like us to take a step back in order to better understand the problems that it tries to solve. And talking about the challenges of modern software development could be a presentation on its own. However, I would like to emphasize on a couple of key areas, starting with developer onboarding. For an organization to grow, for an organization to scale and move fast, it is important to be able to onboard new developers as fast as possible. By onboarding, meaning to get them familiar with the organization projects, with the organization software, and with the organization way of thinking, and get them up to speed, get them to become productive. Unfortunately, there is no streamlined approach in doing so. So usually the onboarding process involves passing around a lot of stale and incomplete documents, which makes the word of mouth the dominant way of transferring knowledge from old developers to new ones. And I really don't like this approach because word of mouth, word on street gives, let's say, a detective vibe, which implies that new hires need to get into the detective role and perform an investigation of their own in order to understand and find out how things should be done for the new role. And this is a problem that's there since forever. However, the last decade, with the increasing popularity of the microservices architectures, this got even worse. And it got worse because in the old days, applications used to be a big, large piece of software that lived in a repository somewhere and it was deployed either on bare metal or on some sort of hosted environment. However, nowadays, that large chunk of software is split into pieces. Those pieces live into multiple different repositories. They use different technologies. They are deployed in different environments. You may have pieces deployed on premises, on the cloud, on Lambdas, and stuff like that, which makes it even harder to track which piece of software runs where it's its code, and those kind of things. And even if that adds to the overhead for developer onboarding, it's even a challenge for existing developers and senior developers, as it becomes very hard to understand and have a complete view of the software of an organization. So we often encounter things like effort duplication because one team is not 100% aware of what the other teams are doing. We often have breakages either due to inconsistent communication patterns or to breaking of dependency. Think, for example, one team creating either a shared component or a service that is used by other teams, but not knowing which are the teams that consume that service. Whenever an incompatible change is introduced, it's impossible to communicate that to the consumers of the service. And when you are on the consumer side of things, when you deal with a dependency that breaks things for you, it's very hard to track which is the team and which is the owner responsible for that change. And the larger the organization is, the more prominent and more pronounced this issue becomes. And nowadays, we have tons of different tools for dealing with the application. We have different tools for interacting with the container orchestration platform, being Kubernetes dashboard, OpenShift console, things like that. We have different tools and dashboards for metrics, for tracing, for managing secrets. So in order to have a complete view of what is going on with our software system, we have to continuously switch from one tool to another and another and another. And often developers don't even have access to all those tools. So we often see, in our case, a lot of clients that do not grant developers access to the OpenShift console. So sometimes it's not even possible to get all the required information. And last but not least, we have to deal with the wall of confusion, which is a term that refers to the disconnect between devs, ops, security, and more, and pretty much describes the lack of DevOps culture, which is something that adds further issues and causes reduced loss of quality, loss of reliability, and slows down the whole development process. In case you haven't already read, the Phoenix Project is a great book that describes this issue, and it is highly recommended. Now, Spotify was such an organization that had to deal with all those issues that mentioned before. So they said, okay, we will invest in something that will help us build our own developer portal. And how would that developer portal solve our needs? Number one, by providing a service catalog, a catalog where all teams would be able to register their software components, a catalog where each component would be able to declare its APIs, the APIs it's exposing, the APIs it's consuming, the services and the software components that it depends on. By providing a collection of software templates which new hires would be able to use in order to easily bootstrap new components, new libraries, new tools, and things like that. And in some cases, even embed in those software templates self-servicing capabilities so that devs are able to directly create a project and get that project deployed to our target environment. By unifying all those tools that I mentioned, tools about metrics, tracing, container orchestration, secret management, and stuff like that in a unified portal, and by providing and building a vibrant community with tons of different plugins where each developer would be able to find a plugin that would help them integrate with a specific piece of software. Worth mentioning that last week it came to my attention that there's even a chatbot plugin for Backstage, which is able to leverage the information that is provided in the service catalog in order, to give users answers about the things that are part of the catalog, which is really new concept, really fresh, and really exciting. And with that, I would like to leave my slide of decks behind and go back to my personalized dev portal and do some more show and tell. I will go again to the home page, which is what usually users see when they start Backstage. However, usually the first thing that they see is not something populated with all those components, but we will get to that. Let's see what those components look like when we try to investigate them and get details about them. So we get the overview of the component through where we are able to see things like where the source of the component is, but also important things like ownership, relations, and stuff like that. So we are currently are looking at the blog component, which represents the project that I'm using for my own blog posts. The owner of this component is Ioannis Canellos, and that's me. And we see that this component is also used by another component called iocanellos.com, which refers to my website. On the bottom of my screen, I have a link, and this links to the GitHub repository. So let's take a quick glimpse at that. It's a normal GitHub repository, which I use to write my blog posts in a particular format called org mode. And then those blog posts are moved to the other project, the iocanellos.com, which is another Git repo which converts those blog posts into a Hugo site. Hugo is a static site generator, which I use in order to populate my website. And in that website, I'm including things like my blog posts, which I mentioned earlier. Let's go back to the catalog and take a look at one of the things that I'm working in my day job at Red Hat. And that is Quarkus, which is a somehow more complex component. It is managed it's owned by the Quarkus team. And I can inspect the Quarkus team. At the moment, it has one member, and that's me, which does not necessarily reflect reality, but it was good enough for my personalized portal. And we also see some of the dependencies of that project, including Decorate, including the Fabricate Kubernetes client. And we see that it is also a dependency for another component called code.quarkus.io. That software component is a service provided by the Quarkus team for developers to use in order to bootstrap new projects. It allows you to add things like the coordinates for your project, versions, build tools, and stuff like that. And it gives you a wide array of extensions to select in order to generate your own project. What's interesting about code.quarkus.io is that it also exposes an API, and I can get those information from Backstage by clicking to provided APIs. And I can even dig deep into the definition of the API, which is represented using the Open API UI, through which I can even invoke operations on code.quarkus.io. So for example, I can go here in order to get all the platforms from the code.quarkus.io API. I can click try it and execute and send a live request to code.quarkus.io and get an actual response back, which is something that can be really important when you have multiple teams in an organization exposing APIs. And by having this way of advertising the API in the contract that you use for consuming that API, it is really important, because teams that are consuming that service can use that as a reference, and you can ensure this way that both the producer of the API, the provider, and the consumer are always aligned. So, I almost forgot. There was something else that I wanted to share with you, which is how you can get Backstage to generate docs for your project using MK Docs. Here I clicked on the Decorate project, which is an open source project I'm also working on. And by clicking the View Tech Docs, I can get Backstage to generate, using MK Docs, a documentation site for this project based on the Markdown files that are already present on that project. It shouldn't take long if it behaves itself. So we will give it a couple of seconds. Okay, for some reason it takes a little bit longer than usual, but what I wanted to show you is that usually it has a way of generating a static website from those Markdown documents for your project, which is a way for teams to communicate the documentation of the project to other teams. And by using the Markdown from the code repository that of the project, you also guarantee that the generated documentation is always up to date and things like that. Now, the question is, how do you get those software components into your catalog? I will leave my browser for just a second, and I will jump to my code editor. This is one of the core Backstage files, the main configuration file, which we use to define all kinds of things, including port configuration, the name of our Backstage instance, how we authenticate, and things like that. But I would like us to focus on this section, which is the catalog section, which allows us to specify locations. Now, what are locations? Locations are some entities in Backstage which we use in order to define things like software components, APIs, and things like that. What is an entity? An entity is the basic chunk of information that Backstage understands. It's a resource usually represented in YAML, and their structure looks awfully similar to Kubernetes resources and Kubernetes manifests. This is the main location that I'm adding in my configuration file, and location is an entity kind which lets me define one or more additional entities. In this particular case, I'm defining additional locations for my slides, my projects, and my software templates, which are things that we saw in the catalog previously. Let's dig a little bit and get a glimpse of how the Quarkus location looks like. It's another location which refers to the Quarkus component. Let's open that. And the Quarkus component is a different kind of Backstage entity, which is named Quarkus. It has a description, supersonic subatomic Java. It includes a URL to where the project version control is, some links like the homepage or the GitHub repo and stuff like that, the type of the component, the owner, and other information like dependencies, which is what was used behind the scenes in order to generate those graphs between components that we witnessed earlier. Other kind of entities, we've seen so far locations, we've seen components, is the API. And here is the code.quarkus API that we've seen earlier, which pretty much includes the OpenAPI definition as part of its specification, and this is how the OpenAPI UI was generated for us. I will jump back to my Backstage portal. Now, providing static configuration for adding those components is one way. An additional way to add the components is by getting Backstage to create those components. When you click on the Create button, you are given two options. One is to register an existing component, either by specifying the URL to its GitHub repo, or to use templates, software templates, which are again a special kind of entities in Backstage. Let me share an example with you. For example, here I'm having three kind of templates: the create Quarkus application, create a Quarkus chatbot, and create a Kubernetes operator using the Quarkus OpenSDK framework. And these are those three templates. Let's have a look at how they are defined and how they look like. Let me full screen. Okay, it's a special kind of entity with a kind template, which inside of it, it defines a couple of parameters that are used to populate a UI that the user is then called to complete in order to create the software component. So we get to specify things like organization name, repository name, descriptions, owners, and things like that. And the end result, we are in the Create Quarkus Chatbot, is when we click the Create Chatbot template, is that we are getting these forms generated. I can specify the name of the organization where I want the software component to be checked in. By clicking Next, I'm prompted with project coordinates, a group ID, artifact ID. It's like name, version, package, and stuff. I get an overview of all the options that I made. And by clicking the Create button, I'm getting the code generated for this component. I'm getting the catalog info generated, tech docs, things like that. And finally, I'm publishing the source code to GitHub, and finally registering the software component into Backstage. And finally, I'm able to open the catalog info component and see everything. I can, from here, I can check the source code of the component. It was just created under my GitHub account. If your organization is not using GitHub, don't worry. Backstage is highly customizable, so you can configure it with GitLab or whatever version control system you are using. And I can inspect its docs, which are dynamically being built. Let's hope that it will be built faster than the last time we visited the screen. Okay, there's no docs for us today. Anyway, what else do we have about the software component? I think that we covered that. And another alternative to adding components to that catalog is by specifying the URL to an existing component. So I will click the register an existing component, and I will specify the URL of an application I previously created. I'll click on Analyze, and I will import that to my catalog. And finally, we'll go to the View component. Now, in this case, we have some things that are slightly different from the components we visited before. Main difference is that we have this tab over here, which gives us information related to Kubernetes. This component at the moment is deployed in my personal Kubernetes test cluster, and I can use Backstage to pull information from the Kubernetes environment directly into my portal, so that I don't have to constantly switch from one tool to the other. So what information I get the information that in my cluster I have a deployment for my Quarkus app, and I have 2 pods. And from what it seems, they also have some sort of failures and are in error state. What other things I can get? I can get information related to CI. For the purposes of CI, this particular project is using Tecton pipelines, and I'm embedding the information from Tecton pipelines directly into my dev portal. And I can even inspect closely the pipeline steps and even go to the step that failed and examine the logs in order to determine what went wrong with my pipeline, which is something really useful to get. By the way, I'm using for that project for GitOps, I'm using Argo CD, and I can even get a tab for Argo CD in my portal. So to recap, I'm looking at my Quarkus app component, and through that component, I can get information from my Kubernetes cluster, from Tecton pipelines, from Argo CD, all in one tool, instead of having to jump from one tool to another and another and another. How was this My Quarkus application created? It was created from one of those templates that I've seen earlier. And more specifically, I used the Create Quarkus application template, which is a special kind of template and a little bit more advanced. And I'll show you why. It's a little bit more advanced for 2 main reasons. The one is that in its UI, it uses some special kind of UI components that are able to retrieve information from code.quarkus.io, which we've seen earlier. It can retrieve things like versions, extensions, and stuff like that we will see later. And in the end, it uses behind the scenes code.quarkus.io to actually generate the project for us. The other way that makes this particular template special is that it does not just create the actual source of the project, it also creates the Argo CD files that we need, the Argo CD application, and it also generates the Tecton pipelines that we need. And not only generates all those, it actually creates the application on Argo CD and deploys all generated resources to our Kubernetes cluster. So by clicking create on this component, I'm not just creating the source code, I'm also triggering a deployment to my target cluster. Let's take a deeper look at how this template works. It looks similar to the ones that we've seen earlier, but it also has some extra stuff. For example, I can prompt users to specify whether they want to have health endpoints, metrics endpoints, info endpoints created. I can select a database and add database capabilities to this extension. And I can also specify one of the following extensions. For example, I can specify REST Jackson or REST resources for Hibernate. These extensions are a subset of the extensions that users are able to specify when they visit the code.quarkus.io, which is this thing. However, I wanted in this example to make it obvious and make it clear that the template author, the platform engineer, as we call him, have the ability to create templates that are more specialized, that they are more focused, that they restrict users, they protect users from suiting their own fit. So instead of letting them pick any Quarkus extension under the sun, they use a curated list of extensions that is, for example, safe with the organization and aligned with the organization guidelines. Same thing for the database. We don't allow them to pick any database. The platform engineer has selected, for example, Postgres, MySQL, and H2, and only forces developers to create new software components using those kind of technologies. In other words, you could say that they are encouraged to create software components that are aligned with the technologies that are part of the tech radar of the organization. And this brings me to this. Give me a second. I will create a new tab to open the tech radar thing, which is another interesting feature in Backstage, is this screen which allows platform engineers to specify which are, let's say, the blessed technologies of the organization. So, for example, here we say that we adopt Java, we adopt Quarkus, but we stopped using OSGI, Spring Boot, and JBoss. On the top right, we have things like cloud-related things. So we adopt Kubernetes, OpenShift. We stopped using Cloud Foundry. And you get the idea. By providing something like that, which can be either statically created or it can be inferred based on the software components that you've registered in your Backstage installation, you get an additional tool to guide newcomers about what they are meant to use, what they are not, and things like that. Back to our software component, we expose those info to the user, and finally we can do things like specify GitHub organization, which is the namespace where we want this software component to get deployed. For this software component, we also build a container image, and we have the ability to select where exactly we would like to push the container image, what image registry we are going to use, and things like that. And finally, we get, again, an overview, and we can click Create. I won't click on Create because we've already created that application, and it is what we've seen earlier. And with this approach, everyone wins and everyone is happy. Developers are happy and they win because they have an easy way to get started with creating new components. They are happy because they get access to self-serving capabilities and no longer have to toss things to the ops people to deploy and things like that. The ops people are happy because they set up things once and they don't have to do the whole repetitive and redundant tasks of doing deployment each time the dev people request a new deployment. Security people are happy because they get access to this catalog, which lists all software components of the organization. And from this software catalog, they are able to infer things like dependencies. They are able to identify easily which are the CVEs that affect the software of the organization and more. And engineering leadership is happy because they get the ability to provide some guidelines and, in a sense, enforce those guidelines and keep things in control. Let me jump back to my deck of slides because I have a QR code which you can use in order to check out those slides if you want to have them. And with that, I will conclude the presentation and go to the question sections if there are any. I will just need a second to switch to the comments tab. Okay, question number one, it comes from Christophe. Do you think that Backstage API is good for coupling algorithm on an app? For coupling algorithm on an app? I'm not 100% sure what do you mean with this question. If you could please elaborate, I will try to answer that. We need knowledge of specific programming languages to make most of Backstage. This is a question coming from Constantino Petro, and the question is: will we need knowledge of a specific programming languages? I think that one will benefit if they are familiar with TypeScript, Node.js, and React, but who will benefit? I'm not referring to developers themselves. I'm referring to the platform engineer who will use Backstage in order to build the dev portal. To give some more context, Backstage is a framework that platform engineers use to create those portals, and then those portals are used by developers. Developers don't necessarily have to develop Backstage itself, to develop the portal itself. They just use what the platform engineer created. So the platform engineer needs to be capable at editing React code and Node.js and be able to tune NPM packages and those kind of things. The developers that we will actually use Backstage in the end, they don't necessarily have to know these things. Other question? Does the platform consider user friendly for new developers? Well, the platform itself is meant to be used by junior developers. It's not meant to be not. We don't expect junior developers to create the portal. The portal is meant to be created by the platform engineer, which should be a senior developer, but the created developer portal is meant to be used by junior developers and not only. Okay, I don't see something else that I could answer in a reasonable amount of time. So thank you all for watching. I hope that you found this useful. I hope that Backstage can help your organization solve some of the challenges that you are having. And with that, I'm stopping my screen sharing and enjoy the rest of the